Komaram Bheem was born on the 22nd of October 1900 into a Gond community that lived in the region of Asifabad district, which falls in present-day Telangana. The Gond community, like any other indigenous community of the country, lived a very simple and straightforward life. Everyday routine centered around the forest, grazing cattle in the forest, getting firewood from the forest, getting the produce of the forest, and practicing shifting cultivation, which they called Podu. Life continued in this manner until the zamindars and the moneylenders spread their net of greed and evil by implementing taxes. They started taxing cattle grazing and collection of firewood. And when the poor Gonds were unable to pay it, they deployed extortionists who they very politely termed as Jangalat police, police of the jungle. But they were, as we understand now very clearly, they were just paid mercenaries who beat up the Gonds mercilessly when they refused to pay or were unable to pay the high taxes given out by the zamindars and the moneylenders. This situation of the Gonds worsened further when in 1865 the Indian Forest Act was implemented. This act completely deprived the Gonds of any access to the forest. Not only were they unable to access the produce, they also lost access to the land for grazing cattle, collecting firewood, and definitely practicing their cultivation. Left with no alternate means of a livelihood and meeting their daily needs, they started to become laborers. And this was a really very sad state of affairs because they were mostly unpaid for the work they did, or they were paid very little, but in contrary, the work that they did was extremely strenuous. Then in the year 1911, Mir Osman Ali Khan, the 7th Asaf Jahi, ascended the throne. And while his intentions for modernizing the state of Hyderabad were really very sincere, this pre-existing feudal structure in his administrative system was keeping him disconnected from his tribal subjects. And he was not aware of this. This had a direct impact on his private army, the Razakars. One fraction of the Razakars turned rogue. They got hand in glove with the Jangalat police, and together they were troubling the Gonds. During skirmishes or disagreements, mostly it would be the Razakars who would take up arms against the poor Gonds. During one such armed disagreement, Bheem and his brother got involved, and the end of that conflict was that one of the Razakars died on the spot. This was going to be a really very serious offense, and they knew that the moment the Nizam came to know about it, he would send officials who would arrest them, and most likely they would be sentenced to death. So, fearing the worst and wanting to escape from it because they were rightly not in the wrong, Bheem escaped from Asifabad and he went into exile. And he was in exile for a really very long time in the belt that was highly populated, densely populated by the Gond communities elsewhere, the Maharashtra side, Yotbal and Chandrapur side. And here he, for the very first time, got to know about the exploits of Babu Rao Shedmake, Ramji Gond. He even heard about the bravery of Alluri Sitaram Raju, though there is no documented evidence that both of them met. But there is definitely some influence that we can infer from Bheem's life. And it's also believed that it's during his time in exile that he learned to read and write, something which came in really very handy once he was back in his village, in his community. Armed with this new knowledge that even the Gonds of Asifabad could protest against the exploitation and demand their right to the produce of the forest, Bheem returned in 1937. When he returned, he did not exactly come back to proper Asifabad. He moved to a place called Babejari near to Asifabad. Here, upon his return, he found that the situation had deteriorated a little bit more. Now, the situation was such that non-tribals could purchase a land and also get a patta, a written document that stated their ownership to the land. However, tribals could not get land which was rightfully theirs. Soon it was announced that on a given date, anyone who did not own a patta would have to vacate from Babijari. On the same date, when none of the Gonds moved out of the village, the Jangalat police came and burned down their houses. Disturbed and worried, Bheem led his people to the office of the revenue inspector, where they demanded that they be allotted some land. The revenue inspector gave them some land at a place a little away from Babijari named Jode Ghat, and for some time everyone lived peacefully, doing their own stuff. Then the Jangalat police once again arrived and started demanding bribe. The first time they asked for a bribe of 500 rupees. Now in the 1930s and 40s, 500 was a huge sum of money, especially for the poor Gonds. But somehow they put in the money and they paid the Jangalat police. For some time there was relief, then they were back again. This second time they wanted 2000 rupees. Bheem refused to make any payment. Instead, he wrote to the forest department at Hyderabad asking them for land and confirmation that they indeed had the right to use that land at Jode Ghat. This was a very successful endeavor again, because this was granted. But the Jangalat police still forced the community to pay up. But the community was quite determined that they would not pay any more bribes. Seeing their staunch opposition, the Razakars started beating them up. They burned their cattle sheds, broke down their houses. Armed struggle broke out. Now, Bheem had sort of anticipated this, and so well in advance he had trained few youths to handle armed conflict in their guerrilla warfare style. But as far as it was possible, Bheem wanted to avoid these kinds of conflicts and wanted to resolve things through constructive actions. So simultaneously, he also sent a petition to the office of the sub-collector asking for help and confirmation that they had land and they be protected from this Jangalat police menace. Unfortunately, even before the letter, the petition could reach the sub-collector's office, the Jangalat police, backed by the Razakars, arrived and a conflict broke out. And in that fighting, one of the armed persons shot Bheem through his hand. This completely outraged the entire community, and they did what they had never done in their history. They sent a letter to the Nizam asking for separate statehood and also demanded the release of everyone from their community who had been wrongly imprisoned. When the letter reached the Nizam, he directed the collector of Asifabad, Abdul Sattar, to meet up with Bheem and find a mutually amicable solution. But Abdul Sattar had other ideas. He just wanted Bheem either to surrender or be ready to die. He had no intentions of granting their request. Twice he sent emissaries in this regard. Both the times they failed. The third time he went in person, but he made it really very clear well in advance that he was not coming for a discussion to find a solution, but to seek his surrender, failing which there would be armed struggle. Bheem was also prepared. On the 1st of September 1940, which also happened to be the auspicious day of Ashwayuja Puja, which is a harvest festival marking the end of the monsoon season, Abdul Sattar arrived with his team of policemen. He arrived early in the morning at a time when the women of the village were going to get drinking water, and they spotted them from afar. But they did not want to raise alarm, so they quietly dispersed and notified about their arrival to Bheem and his aides, so that by the time Abdul Sattar was at their doors, they were really prepared mentally and physically to face them. Abdul Sattar spent no time trying to make known why he had arrived, and very frankly stated that I have come to seek your surrender, and if you're not going to surrender, then be prepared to die. Well, Bheem put forward his demands of his community, and when formally Abdul Sattar rejected it, a fight broke out. It was a very short and intense fight. It was guerrilla warfare on one side and armed struggle using the best of weaponry on the other side. And soon it was Abdul Sattar's team that won. Bheem had fallen to the ground. He had taken many bullets. But even as he lay dead, Abdul Sattar ensured that his body was riddled with bullets to the point that it was completely unrecognizable. And then it was burned so that there was no trace, no physical trace of him being ever alive. Bheem's rebellion was short-lived during his lifetime but continued for several years after his death. In 1946, it got merged with the Telangana rebellion against the Nizam, and afterwards it was pushed into near oblivion. But finally, it was in 2016, 2 years after the formation of the state of Telangana, that he finally received some recognition when the district of Asifabad was renamed as Komaram Bheem Asifabad, thereby reminding the Gonds of their one ultimate goal. I hope you found this episode quite informative. If so, please do let me know. Do give us a like and a subscribe, and do watch out for the remaining episodes for the month of September. I'll see you soon again. Till then, take care.